Right. In our last class, we were just discussing about overhead, how to account for. So during that, we discussed three stages. The first one is collection. The second one is classification. And the third one is allocation and apportionment. And we said during the collection stage, we are just taking an account of which all will come under the category of overhead expenses. And in the classification stage, we would be classifying that on the basis of maybe on different basis. There are different factors which could be considered when we are trying to classify that. But broadly, we can say that we can classify basis on the basis of element. We can classify on the basis of its controllability, the nature, right? So we have discussed 3 or 4 methods of classifying these overhead. And once it has been classified, the next stage is allocation and apportionment. Now, when we were telling about allocation, the whole, that is those expenses which can be correctly allocated to one particular department will be coming under the category of allocation. Now, apportionment is applicable when a particular expense cannot be identified separately for a department. It might be occurring in collection or in lump sum. That needs to be proportionally allocated to different departments. Right. These were the things, some of the things which we discussed in our previous classes. Now, when we were talking about the allocation and apportionment, we said that there are some bases on which we can apportion, we can proportionally allocate the expense to different departments. As we said about, maybe if it is the case of factory rent, the primary or the logical assumption for apportionment would be the area occupied by the department. Then we were talking about lighting, where we said that light points or the floor area, the area occupied by the department can be one logical. Likewise, we have discussed different aspects or the basis on which we can go with the apportionment. Right. Now, in today's class, in the first part, I will explain you by one example of how do we go with this apportionment and allocation. And later, we will do exercise on that. Right. So I'm just going with the question. These we have already discussed the basis on which we can apportionment our various overhead expenses. Now, the example in front of you, you can see that, it's an industry where it has 3 departments, X, Y, and S. Okay. Now, X and Y, reading through the question, you will understand that X and Y is production departments and S is a service department, which is very important for us to understand because this concept of reapportionment comes here, right? Which we are not going to discuss in our today's class. But in this particular question, you have to understand that there are 2, we are talking about 3 departments. In that 2 departments are production department and the third one is service department. Okay. Now, the item of overhead expenses are given below. There is first part, that is indirect material. Now, as you can see in the question, indirect material for X is correctly identified as ₹1,000. Y, it is identified as 2,000. And S, it is 300, which means this comes under the category of allotment. You can straight away enter for department X, Y, and S respectively. There is no, as you say, there is no need for proportional allocation. It's already given in the question, which is in front of us. Now, when we look at the next few expenses, we can say that there is no apportion or there is no particular allocation which is being done to X, Y, S. Instead, rent as a whole is given, depreciation expense as a whole is given, supervision as a whole is given, right? Now the question of apportionment comes. Now we really have to think about apportionment, right? This is the concept where we will apply the concept of apportionment on some logical basis. Now, as we have learned in our previous classes, we know that rent needs to be apportioned on the basis of floor area. Because in the question, you can see that there are 3 bases which is given as additional information. 1 is floor area, 2 is number of workers, 3 is cost of plant. So definitely these 3 are the basis on which we have to apportion the expenses given in this question. So I hope you understand the context in which we are discussing. We are given with an exercise, right? And the particular factory, here in this case, it is Ideal Industries. They have three departments, Department X, Department Y, and Department S. And when we look into the question, we can find that as a whole, the indirect material expense is given separately for X, for Y, as well as for S. So there is no need for apportionment. It comes under the category of allotment. The next expenses, we can see that it is given as a whole. So we really have to go with the concept of apportionment. Now, in the question itself, additional information is given with respect to the floor area occupied by Department X, Department Y, Department X. Same as the case, number of workers for X, Y, and S. Right. In case of cost to plant, it is, you can see that the cost for X, Y, and S is given. So as per our question, we're just trying to look at how do we allocate this to our different department. Now, just remember the first expense, we really have to go with the allotment. So indirect material for X, it is 1000. For Y, it is 2000. For S, it is 300. Now, let's look at how that is being allocated to our department. So this is an example of an overhead statement of allocation and apportionment, where you will have particulars column. You will write what are the items. Then you have a column which is basis of apportionment. Then that if it is the case of allocation, there is no basis of apportionment. Then we will have a total column. Then we will have two production department. This needs to be written in this way because that is very important when we go with the reapportionment. So this format needs to be followed. Otherwise, it will be confusing for you when you go with the next stage of reapportionment. So you can see that the production departments being separately marked X and Y, and the service department is separately shown. Right. Now we take the first expense which we read in our question, that is indirect material. Now we have seen that that is an item that can be directly allocated to different departments. So we are going to do that. The total of that we know, of course, the total of that will be 1000 plus 2000 plus 300. So that is 3300. That's what we have put in the total column, that is 3300. Now it's directly given. We just have to pick and write in respective department under the head, different department head. So for X, it is 1000. For Y, it is 2000. For S, it is 300. I repeat, it's just allocated because in the question itself, it is given X, the indirect material expense is 1000. Y, it is 2000. And S, it is 300. So in the question itself, we can find this, right? Now going with the next is rent. But we know that when we come to this expense, there needs to be a proportional allocation. So it comes under the category of apportionment. Now we have learned that the basis for categorization of rent is the floor area. Now it will be easy for us to establish a link, that is establish a ratio, not link, a ratio here. Right? Because otherwise it will be very difficult for us to calculate. So in order to simplify our calculation, we put the ratio as 3:2:1 because our expense was, floor area was 3000, 2000 and 1000. So we established a ratio from that. That is 3:2:1. We have learned, right? That is just a mathematics in that. So we have 3:2:1 and we have the total expense of 6000. So we know that the expense which would be going for X, right? We know we have to keep this ratio while allocating the expenses to different departments. Right? Here we can see that 6000 being proportionately allocated to production departments as well as service department in the ratio of 3:2:1. This is what we call as apportionment or proportional allocation, because we know here we are given with a total expense, total indirect expense. Now we have 3 departments and we need to actually split this to different departments based on some component, because ultimately this needs to be absorbed with our final product, right? To find out the cost of production. So that is why we are trying to share this expense. See, imagine we have a factory space, okay? We have a common factory space and you two friends, use that space together, but you are having two separate departments for producing product, two separate products being produced from each of these departments. So when you decide about cost of production, the common rent which you pay for your factory building need to be shared between two of you. You need to add proportionate cost to your product as well as your friend. Your friend has to do the same with his product. So cost of production can be found out only when we are just splitting. There would be many other expenses, but I'm talking about the rent connected with factory space. You need to share it, right, in order to arrive at what is the cost of production for yours as well as your friend's product. Right. The same concept is looked over here. So we are rent, since it is rent, it is shared on the basis of floor space. Same as the way we had supervision expense. So you can see 8,000 being collectively given. So what did we do? We know that supervision, the basis of calculation would be number of employees. So we made a proportionate allocation. It's been given number of employees 12, 6 and 10. 10. So, no, 12. There is an error. I will correct it. So, it will be the ratio is 2:1:1. Okay. So, when we are just trying to split this on the basis of this ratio, the total expense would be 8,000 and we are sharing it on the basis of this ratio. That is 2:1:1, which is 4,000, 2,000 and 2,000. That is proportionate allocation. Now for depreciation, as we know, the basis for computation of depreciation would be cost of plant. And when we check here, the ratio applicable would be 25, 15 and 10. So we have established the ratio as 5:3:2. And accordingly, the total of this 5,000 being split into X, Y and S. Right? Now, the next expense which is being given in the question for us is repairs to plant. The ideal basis for sharing or proportional allocation of repairs to plant would be cost of plant. Right, it is repairs until otherwise you are given with some other basis directly indicating in your question. Since the cost of plant is already given, for us the ideal or the logical basis for allocation of that would be cost of plant. So we allocated on that same ratio, that is 5:3:2. So the total of 2,000 being split into different departments. Insurance of the plant, we know. See, suppose if we are given with cost of the plant, the basis, the other basis which we are given is floor space, number of employees, cost of plant. So since it is being mentioned that this insurance is connected with the plant itself, it will be good that we go with the cost of the plant. So we took the same ratio 5:3:2 and we split the expense between these departments. Right, and we have written the total. This is the total column, total of all and total of X, total of Y, total of the service department, that is yes. So this is all about allocation and apportionment. I just underline the word allocation and apportionment. We are doing allocation and apportionment. So as I said earlier, the whole which can be directly identified with a particular department will come under the category of allocation. But if an expense which cannot be identified for clearly identified as it belongs to a specific department, in that case, we will go with apportionment or proportionate allocation. So when we are talking about proportionate allocation, we need a basis on which this needs to be allocated. Right. That is why we say that proportional allocation. So that basis would be given in your question from the exam point of view, but we really have to select the one which logically suits with your particular expense. That's actually very important for us. So that part we will have to be very familiar with. So in this particular example, we were given with rent, we were given with supervision expenses, we were also given with expenses connected with depreciation, repairs, and insurance. So rent, of course, we know it can be proportionally allocated on the basis of floor area occupied by each department. Now, supervision, yes, one supervisor may be taking care of a certain number of employees. So we know that suppose if the supervisor is common to X, Y, and is S, okay, X, Y, and S. So the logic of allocation of supervision expense, proportionate allocation of supervision expenses would be considering the number of employees in each department. That's why we took the logic here as logical basis for classification as number of employees. We allocated that on the basis of number of employees in X department, in Y department, as well as in S department respectively. Then depreciation, of course, we know that it is directly connected with cost of the asset. As the cost increases, the depreciation charged on that also would be increasing, right? So we are taking cost of plant as the basis for apportionment of depreciation expense, or proportionate allocation of depreciation expenses. The next, of course, it is repairs connected to this, but we assuming that it is repairs connected to this particular plant. So cost of the plant again is taken as the basis. Next one is insurance of the plant, right? So here what we will do is since it is insurance of this particular plant, we take cost of the as we said, cost of the plant as the basis for categorizing allocation of this particular expense. So this is all about, you will be asked a question like prepare a statement for allocation and apportionment of overhead expense, or sometimes you might be asked to prepare allocation, apportionment, and reapportionment, which we have not learned now, we are going to learn, right? So that's it. So I conclude in our overhead allocation stages, we learned the first 3 stages, which includes first is you identify what are the possible. In this case, it's given in our question. So we identified that these are the possible expenses connected with overhead charges, right? And then we need to classify that. That is also given in this question. So it's not a matter for us. The third stage is very important. We are asked to prepare a statement showing the allocation and apportionment. That's why we prepared a statement having in this format we did with the allocation as well as the apportionment component. Right. Now we will do an exercise in this. We'll stop here.